I would like to introduce David Bycroft, founder of the Australian Homestay Network, which was established in 2007. David will be speaking with us today about the Australian accommodation crisis and its impact on international students. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Erin.
David, can you start by telling us how international students are being affected by the Australian housing shortage?
Well, clearly there is less accommodation and rooms available than ever before on record. The Australian vacancy rate is at its lowest point on record at 0.8% nationally, and supply and demand is going to be incredibly unbalanced when the international students start coming back into Australia. This will affect them in high rental prices, not being able to find rooms, etc. So we're in for a real rough ride in accommodation.
Well, what do you think we can learn from what's happening in the rest of the world?
Well, we're fortunate that we've been able to see what's been happening in the rest of the world because our borders were closed when many of the other countries stayed open. They just weren't prepared for the return of international students earlier than us. And there's been a whole lot of problems overseas in the UK, Canada, the Netherlands, etc., about international students now having trouble finding accommodation, and also, if they do find it, exorbitant rental prices. So there'll be more scams in housing scams, and there's some international students even experiencing homelessness because they've got their study paid for and booked, but they haven't got anywhere to stay. Some institutions like University of Glasgow and the University of Amsterdam are literally telling potential students not to enrol unless they've secured accommodation. And this type of messaging has never happened before.
Well, considering all that, how can Australia improve the availability of affordable accommodation options for international students?
Well, we believe that the best way for institutions who want international students to come in the next few years is to work in partnerships with accommodation providers and other partners to try to find as many spare rooms as they can. And we've been working with institutions and organisations such as Study Gold Coast to come up with ways that we can attract more people to host international students in their spare rooms. We've seen governments such as Western Australia Government and the Northern Territory offer, grants and subsidies towards accommodation, but this does not necessarily solve the issue. And if the students are given direct grants, then often that money doesn't go for the benefit of the student to help solve the problem. We see that there will be a big increase in purpose-built accommodation in the future, but this can take years, and with the cost of construction and real estate prices, purpose-built is going to become one of the most expensive forms of accommodation for international students in the future. So governments have to be very clear on how they work on incentives for people to use their empty rooms. We already have Australian Tax Office mentioning that homestay payments for international students are tax-free. But we would like them to go out and make very clear messaging about this and encourage both pensioners and people with spare rooms to take an international student, and they will not have to include it in their tax returns, the income that they receive.
And what can education providers be doing now to plan for the year ahead?
Well, education providers have the most to lose, and if students can't find accommodation, and they've already accepted the student into their university or their school or college, that's going to be a real problem for them. If the student can't find accommodation, generally speaking, the student won't come. And that would mean refunds, that would mean empty classrooms and also it would affect their budgets, but where there would normally be international students filling those classrooms with domestic students in most cases. So the best way, again, is to work in partnerships. We want to see people working from education providers with the media, with government, with homestay providers like ourselves, with accommodation providers, and really solving the problem of getting enough supply for the demand that we want to look forward to having in Australia. So programs like Study Gold Coast is about to launch in association with the Australian Homestay Network, Host for the Coast. And that will be a Gold Coast-wide campaign being supported by large institutions like Griffith University and Bond University. And we'll be working in partnership with the local council, the community, the media, Study Gold Coast, the universities, and we think that will make a big difference. Ideally, we've got to learn from what's happened overseas, and we've got to get ahead of the problem before it's too late.
We appreciate your insight, David. Those are some very practical ways we can work together to welcome international students in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you.